It started with a text. No emojis, no warmth, just 7 clipped words. Dinner's at 6. Dress neat. Don't be late. That was it. No, I can't wait to see you, or even a casual, hope you're well. Nothing. Just a time, a command, and the unspoken expectation that I'd comply. I stared at the screen for a few seconds, my thumb hovering over the keyboard before I locked the phone and set it face down on the coffee table. The apartment was quiet, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound breaking the stillness. Outside, Brooklyn was coated in an early winter dusk, casting everything in a soft gray light. This was Loreline's way. Every holiday, every milestone, she ran it like a campaign launch. Seating charts, flower arrangements, color-coded name tags. I'd always thought it was her need for perfection. Now I wasn't so sure it wasn't just control dressed up as etiquette. Years ago, during one Christmas dinner at our parents' house, I had worn a deep green sweater I loved. Loreline had looked me over and said, "Oh, bold choice. Loud enough for everyone to hear, but soft enough to pretend she hadn't meant anything by it." Since then, I always second-guessed what I wore to anything involving her. This time, she wasn't hosting alone. It was at her fiancé's parents' estate in Greenwich. That meant new players, new social rules. I hadn't met them before. Wasn't even sure I'd been meant to. Still, the message had come, and like some programmed response I couldn't unlearn, I'd already begun planning what to bring. 3 days later, she called. I was sipping coffee by the window, half listening to a podcast, when her name lit up on the screen. I answered, cautious. "Just wanted to check in," she began, her voice sugar-dipped but brittle underneath. I know we already said 6 p.m., but just be mindful of the vibe, okay? It's more formal than our usual stuff. I paused. Formal, like suits and silence. Or formal, like no sequins and swearing? She gave a tight laugh. "Just don't wear anything flashy. It's a conservative group. You don't want to stick out." There it was, the subtext sliding out like a knife from silk. "Like your in-laws?" I asked, not bothering to hide the edge in my tone. There was a silence on the other end, then a forced, just, be understated. I didn't answer. She didn't clarify. After we hung up, I opened my closet and stared at my clothes for longer than I care to admit. I chose a navy wrap dress. Simple, respectable, not too bright, not too dull. The kind of dress that said, "I'm here," but not, "I'm the problem." Then I got to work. I wrapped a bottle of small batch Merlot in a linen cloth, tying it with a dark green ribbon. Beside it, I packed a tin of almond Florentines, my grandmother's recipe. They were crisp, golden, slightly salty. She used to say, "People pretend to like sweet things, but they remember what's got bite." I hoped that still held true. On Christmas Eve morning, I loaded everything into my car and started the drive. Manhattan fell away behind me as the roads widened and the homes grew taller. Snow lined the sidewalks like polite applause. The sky hung low, overcast and undecided, and every passing mile added to the quiet tension building in my chest. There's a difference between being invited and being wanted. That sentence looped in my mind like a soft refrain. By the time I reached the estate, the sun was a muted disk hiding behind thick clouds. The house loomed like something out of a Nancy Meyers film. Tall windows, marble pillars, evergreen garlands wrapped around lanterns. A valet greeted me with a clipboard and a neutral smile. I stepped out, straightened my coat, grabbed the wine and cookies, and walked toward the grand oak doors. Before I could knock, they opened. Loreline stood there in a cream dress that looked like it had never met a wrinkle. She smiled, but her eyes didn't crinkle, didn't lift. "You didn't bring anyone, did you?" she asked, almost before the door finished opening. I blinked. "No, it's just me," she exhaled, relief evident. "Good." The door shut behind me with a soft click that sounded far too final. The scent of cinnamon and rosemary drifted through the front hall as Loreline led me inside. The house looked like it had leapt out of a luxury catalog. Every wreath, every garland, every bow seemed placed by someone who charged by the hour. There was no warmth to it. It was elegant, yes, but in that showroom sort of way. Pretty to look at, but not meant to be touched. My heels echoed a little too loudly against the polished wood floors as I followed her past the staircase and into the main dining area. The space opened wide, tall ceilings, chandeliers like floating galaxies overhead. Everything glittered except the people. Guests milled around with drinks in hand, exchanging polite laughter. The volume dipped as I entered, then lifted again, just a breath off beat. Loreline didn't introduce me. She just kept walking toward the dining table. I tightened my grip on the wine and cookies I'd brought. No one asked if they could help carry them. No one reached for them. I felt them grow heavier in my hands with every step. When Loreline finally turned to face me again, it was to pluck the cookies from my arms. "I'll just set these in the kitchen," she said, already halfway gone. I was left standing beside the table. Every chair had a name card, small, embossed, elegant font. Except one. There was no card in front of it, and unlike the others, which were plush and upholstered, this one was a folding chair, slightly lower, slightly off-tone. A staff member wheeled it in, gave a tiny nod in my direction, and quietly walked away. Even chairs know who belongs. I sat, adjusting the hem of my dress, careful not to snag the fabric on the metal frame. Around me, glasses clinked, and cutlery shifted in anticipation. Conversations swelled, dipped, and changed language when I approached. I'd catch a phrase in English, only for it to vanish into French before I could respond. Sylviane, Loreline's soon-to-be mother-in-law, smiled at me when our eyes met, but it didn't reach past her cheeks. It was the kind of smile that says, "I see you," and follows silently with, "but not enough to remember you." I offered a polite nod in return. This wasn't my first rodeo. Social exclusion often arrives with a smile. My therapist had said that once, and tonight it echoed louder than any holiday carol. I made my way to the bar, poured myself a splash of sparkling water, and tried to find a soft place to land in the room's energy. It didn't exist. I joined a conversation near the fireplace, 3 women laughing about a ski trip to Aspen. I smiled, asked a question about snow conditions. One woman answered, then physically pivoted away from me. I was left talking to her shoulder. Okay then. On the way back toward my misplaced chair, I passed the kitchen and caught sight of the tray I'd handed Loreline. It was in the trash bin, still wrapped, untouched. My stomach dropped, but I kept walking, kept smiling. My face was starting to ache from the effort. Back at the table, the guests were settling into their assigned seats. The folded chair remained mine. I sat quietly, adjusting my posture to match the height difference. As the dinner moved forward, course after course, I noticed how my silverware clinked a little louder, how my plate seemed always to be the last filled. Polite indifference is a skill here. They've perfected it. At some point, a man across from me turned to Loreline and said, "Wait, are you 2 sisters?" Loreline didn't miss a beat. "Oh, well, Zephyrine and I are different types. She's more the indie spirit of the family." A few chuckles followed. Someone raised an eyebrow at me. Another sipped their wine with exaggerated curiosity. I didn't respond. I simply folded my napkin a little tighter on my lap. Indie spirit or invisible one? The clink of silverware had become rhythm by now. Casual, orchestrated, impersonal. Appetizers were served on fine china, and the conversations around me danced from real estate to wine pairings, bouncing from one well-placed anecdote to another. I was chewing through a bite of beet tartlet when a round of laughter erupted to my left. Light at first, then more layered, the kind of laughter that starts in the chest and tightens through shared subtext. It started in English, something about someone's husband confusing a bidet for a foot soak. But then, without pause, the group slipped into French. I caught the tone before I caught the words, sharp, breezy, condescending. Then came the line, "Elle a l'air d'une pauvre provinciale." She looks like a poor country girl. I didn't flinch. I didn't drop my fork. I didn't even raise my eyes. I just swallowed. Not the food. My pride. They thought I wouldn't understand. I guess they assumed my silence meant ignorance. That I was some floral-scented ornament brought along to diversify the table. The woman who said it, someone I hadn't been introduced to, chuckled and sipped her red wine like she'd just delivered a clever pun. Loreline didn't correct her. Didn't say a word. She smiled and continued cutting her roasted duck like nothing cruel had just been laid on the table. I kept my eyes on my plate and reminded myself to chew slowly, to breathe through my nose, to sit still. There are many things people assume about silence, that it's submission, that it means you're soft, unsure, oblivious. But I knew better, because I'd been quiet all my life, and I'd survived every room just like this one. What none of them knew, not even Laureline, was that I'd spent a semester in Montreal. It wasn't a big thing, it hadn't come up, she hadn't asked, I never offered. But while there, I'd taken enough French to catch insult wrapped in velvet, never mistake quiet for clueless. They are not the same species. Somewhere down the table, a little girl's voice pierced through the symphony of clinking glasses. Arythea, if I remembered right, one of Laureline's fiancé's nieces. She was seated at the kids' table but had managed to shuffle next to me with a slice of pie. "Are you the babysitter?" she asked, her voice small and entirely sincere. I turned to her, smiling in a way I hoped didn't show how much that question split something in me. "You look like the one from last year," she added, licking her fork. My smile didn't falter, but inside, I folded just a little more. She hadn't meant anything by it, but it landed with precision. A child's honesty is both sword and mirror. I patted her shoulder gently. "No, sweetheart, just here for dinner." Back at the adult table, the conversation shifted toward politics, then fundraising galas, then an awkwardly long tangent about someone's pool renovation. A server walked by with a tray of freshly sliced lamb and paused. She made eye contact with everyone, refilling plates, asking preferences, until she reached me. Then she looked away. Laureline leaned in and whispered something to her. I couldn't hear it. But whatever it was, it made the woman hesitate, then continue on without offering me anything. I wasn't hungry anymore anyway. Rejection here wore heels and perfume. It was choreographed in the pauses, coded in the glances, and delivered with grace. That's when something shifted. I stopped trying to be comfortable. I started watching. Every gesture, every word, every lie. They weren't just ignoring me, they were framing me as an outsider, bit by bit, making sure I knew I was an afterthought. The more I paid attention, the more I realized how well practiced this all was. The French jokes, the child's confusion, the staff's omission. It wasn't clumsy or accidental, it was curated. Like the floral arrangements, like the tablecloths, like the playlist humming softly in the background. I adjusted the napkin on my lap, sat a little straighter, and stopped participating. I became a mirror, not a guest. I wanted them to see themselves in me, cold, excluded, watching. Then I heard it. Sylviane's voice, casual but clear, floated from a conversation behind me. "She doesn't belong in the photo. It would ruin the framing." This time, I didn't swallow. I pushed my chair back just a couple of inches, enough to feel the floor beneath me. I didn't stand. I didn't speak. But I stopped smiling. Dinner had drifted into its midpoint, the part where conversation gets looser, laughter louder, and everyone assumes the wine has smoothed over any remaining awkwardness. But for me, things had just started to crystallize. I sat at my seat, still a half-inch lower than the rest, still missing a name card, watching everything unfold like a silent stage play. Across the table, a man I didn't know, gray blazer, expensive watch, the kind of accent that said boarding school and hedge funds, leaned toward Laureline and said something in French that made her laugh. Not a chuckle. A real, from-the-gut laugh. Others joined in. I tilted my head just slightly to catch it. "Elle gère des bibelots sur Internet, n'est-ce pas?" "She sells trinkets online, doesn't she?" They meant my business, my shop, the one I built from nothing. Handmade jewelry, custom ceramics, things I shipped with handwritten notes because I cared that much. But to them, it was just knickknacks. I didn't care about them. Strangers. Insignificant. I cared that Laureline laughed, not in shock, not to correct him, but in approval. I didn't mind their opinion. I minded hers. The one who knew better, but played along anyway. She could have said, "Actually, she runs her own studio. It's successful." She could have smiled politely and pivoted the topic. She didn't. She chose the laugh. And with that, something snapped inside me. Not a breakdown, but a breakdown of tolerance. I started noticing things, like how Laureline hadn't translated a single French comment all evening, or how she had subtly redirected conversations every time someone asked me a direct question. Her smile was a mask, and it wasn't for me, it was for them. The clinking of silverware began to feel like static in my ears. Every scrape of a fork against porcelain felt like a slap on marble. I looked down at my plate, pushed a pea across it, and decided I was done pretending. Then came the next moment. Laureline, still smiling, leaned in and said, "Hey, can you help grab some of the empty glasses? You're closest to the kitchen anyway." It wasn't a question. It wasn't said with warmth. It was a command, delivered sweetly in front of 8 other people. Before I could rise, a woman across the table, Sylviane's cousin maybe, looked at me and said, "Oh, I thought she was one of the wait staff." My hands curled beneath the table, my nails pressed into my palm. I stood, not saying a word, and began collecting glasses. Not because I was ashamed, but because I had made a decision. And once I'm done collecting facts, I don't need to raise my voice. When they think you're beneath them, they ask favors. When they know you're above, they ask permission. I returned the glasses to the kitchen and took my time washing my hands. When I came back out, the group had already shifted. People stood, mingled, refilled drinks. Laureline moved around them like a host on autopilot, never once meeting my gaze. So I stopped trying. Some people collect memories, others collect evidence. And I had plenty now. I saw it all. The way Laureline directed who sat where, who was paired with whom in conversation. The way she adjusted the room like a PR campaign. This wasn't family, it was optics. And I wasn't a participant. I was a tool. Then came the toast. Elsinore stood, raised his glass, and gave a half-hearted speech about blessings and legacy. Everyone joined in, their glasses raised mid-air, faces turned toward Sylviane as she picked up the thread. Someone handed me a glass of champagne. I took it, looked at it for a moment, and quietly said, "No thank you," placing it back on the tray. Nobody noticed, or they pretended not to. It wasn't protest, it was a line. Quiet but unmistakable. Sylviane turned to me at the end of her speech and added one final flourish in French. "Shall we toast to family?" I met her eyes, smile fixed, steady, controlled. Define family, I thought, but I didn't say it. I just smiled back and didn't drink. The sky had darkened to a soft navy by the time Sylviane tapped her champagne flute with a spoon and announced it was time for the family photo. "Everyone outside, please, by the fire pit. Let's get the photo before dessert," she said, waving her hand like she was dismissing a waiter. People murmured, some grabbing coats, others clinging to their glasses as they stepped into the backyard. The chill was sharp, the kind that slips past even the most expensive wool. Lights strung in neat rows above the patio glowed amber, and the fireplace was already roaring, a perfectly staged backdrop for whatever heirloom-worthy portrait they had in mind. I followed the group out slowly, hands tucked into my coat pockets. The photographer, Betrayal, I'd heard Laureline call him, was already arranging chairs and suggesting poses. I stood quietly near the back, waiting for a cue that never came. Names were called, couples, parents, even a family friend from Boston who'd apparently been like a second daughter to Sylviane. But not me, not even a glance. Laureline looked right at me at one point and offered a half shrug, then turned to Betrayal and said, "Let's do family first." That phrase rang louder than the crackle of the fire behind them. It wasn't said with malice. It was said the way you say, "Let's clear the plates." Routine. Reflex. I stepped to the side. Betrayal adjusted the lens, moving subtly to avoid my figure in the periphery. I didn't make a fuss, didn't say a word, but my body knew. The slight sting behind my eyes, the way my jaw clenched before I even realized I was doing it. A photo says more than 1,000 words. Mine said, "She doesn't belong." After the shutter clicked 3 times, I leaned toward Laureline and whispered, "Did you really just leave me out of the family photo?" She barely turned. "It's not that serious. You're not technically family yet. Yet, a word people use when they want to cut you now, but keep the wound fresh later." I walked back inside alone. No one noticed. The noise from the dining room still buzzed, but it felt distant, like I'd stepped behind a glass wall. The hallway lights were warm, but I felt cold all the same. I passed the living room on my way to the bathroom and noticed the framed photos lining the mantel. Loreline's graduation, of course. Sylviane and Elsinore on a boat in the Amalfi Coast. A candid black and white from some gala last spring. Then one caught my eye. It was Laureline's high school prom. I remembered that night because I'd taken the picture. I remembered how I'd stood next to her in a blue dress I loved, how we'd both laughed at something stupid she'd said just before the flash. But in the framed version, I'd been cropped out. It was a tight shot, just her in the frame, glowing. I exhaled. Maybe I shouldn't have been surprised. Back in the dining room, Sylviane tapped her phone, and soft French music began playing through the Bluetooth speakers. A few guests clapped lightly, nodding at the selection. I knew the song. La fille indigne, the unworthy daughter. The lyrics floated gently, almost lovingly, but the message was clear. It was about a girl who didn't live up to her parents' expectations, a girl who strayed too far from the family line, a girl who, no matter what she tried, was never quite enough. The others smiled as they listened, oblivious, but I heard every word. I excused myself to the restroom, locked the door behind me, and leaned over the sink. The mirror caught my eyes, still dry, still sharp. They don't get to define me, I said aloud. Not with their music, their language, or their photos. When I returned to the fire pit, some guests had settled into chairs with coffee and digestifs. My seat, my small folding chair without a name card, was now taken by someone else. A man I didn't know, sipping port and laughing at something Sylviane had just said. No one looked up, no one gestured for me to reclaim it. They didn't just want me out of the picture, they wanted me out of the room. Back inside, the dining room had settled into that afterglow lull, half-eaten desserts, fingers swirling the last of red wine in long-stemmed glasses, the hum of conversations less rehearsed but still sharp-edged. The candles flickered gently as I took my seat again, though I wasn't sure why I bothered. I had no appetite, no warmth left in my chest to fake another laugh. One of Laureline's fiancé's uncles, a man with a voice that had clearly spent decades leading boardrooms, stood with a raised glass. To family, he began with theatrical ease, and to their extended guests. There was polite laughter around the table. Then he looked directly at me and asked, "So, how do you know Laureline again?" The question hung there, stupid and precise. Laureline didn't even glance my way before jumping in. "Oh, she's a friend from New York. You know, creative crowd." I nodded once, just once. My hands folded in my lap so tight, I thought I might leave nail marks on my skin. Being erased by a stranger hurts. Being erased by your own blood, that's carnage. I waited through the rest of dessert like someone watching a house slowly burn from inside it. No panic, just ash and heat. Excusing myself, I walked slowly to the powder room and locked the door behind me. I looked at my reflection. It wasn't tear-stained. It wasn't cracked. Just still. "I don't need a confrontation," I whispered. "I need a record." I opened the notes app on my phone. The title read, "They Thought I Wasn't Listening." I started typing, word for word, that toast, the question, her answer. My silence wasn't submission anymore, it was strategy. When I returned to the table, coffee had been served, and Sylviane was already queuing up the next round of background music on her phone. Another French song began to play. Slow, haunting, precise. The title scrolled across the speaker. Elle n'a jamais compris. She never understood. Sylviane caught my eye and smiled. Not warmly, not kindly, but knowingly. If this was their language of control, I would speak my own dialect. Action. I stepped forward calmly, reaching for the small plate of almond cookies in front of Laureline. "Hey," I said, my tone even. "Can we talk after this? Alone." She didn't look up. "Can we not do this now?" "No," I said, placing the plate gently down. "We can't not do this anymore." She still didn't meet my gaze. I walked away before she could answer. Back in the foyer, I pulled out my journal from my bag and flipped to the next blank page. I wrote one word across the top in block letters. Enough. I didn't know yet how I'd make my line visible, but I knew I wouldn't step back from it again. Minutes later, I heard footsteps. Sylviane approached, a brandy snifter in one hand, her other resting lightly on her pearl-lined belt. "Would you like to stay for brandy and the family slideshow?" she asked. The tone was smooth, like she hadn't just thrown daggers all night. I smiled. "No, thank you," I replied, my voice clear, steady. "I don't need to see more pictures I'm not in." The room softened into something quieter, the kind of hush that comes with decaf coffee and the clink of dessert forks. The lighting dimmed just enough to make everything glow, a calculated warmth that felt more staged than sincere. Sylviane stood again. Of course she did. "Before we move on to the slideshow," she said, raising her glass with a rehearsed ease, "I just want to thank each of you for making tonight so special." She began listing names, her son, obviously, Laureline, the fiancé's extended family. Even the caterer's assistant got a mention for discreet excellence. The room chuckled, but she never said my name. Not once. I didn't shift. I didn't flinch. But in my chest, something cooled. Not sadness, something sharper, something cleaner. When they don't say your name, they're not forgetting. They're erasing. I lowered my gaze to my lap, took in the dress I was wearing, soft beige, long-sleeved, modest. The one Laureline had suggested over the phone. "Go neutral. Don't upstage anyone." I'd thought she was trying to help me fit in. Then, just behind me, I caught it, two guests murmuring as they passed. "I almost asked her to refill my water," one said, amused. "That's how close she looks to the au pair." They didn't even lower their voices. And they weren't wrong. My dress didn't scream guest, it whispered help. When they tell you to dim your light, it's not for ambiance, it's for control. I didn't say a word. I just picked up my phone under the table and began typing. Names, comments, songs, everything. Some people journal feelings. I document facts. Because facts become freedom. Across the room, a woman with cropped hair and too much perfume raised her glass toward Laureline. "Those Florentines you made, heaven, and that wine? My God, where did you find it?" Laureline beamed, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear like she'd been modestly praised. "Oh, just a little something I threw together." I stared at the half-empty wine rack by the fireplace, where my gift had been displayed earlier. I recognized the wrapping, my wrapping, the ribbon, my grandmother's recipe, all of it. You can't reclaim a gift once it's stolen, but you can mark the thief. I didn't interrupt, I didn't correct her. Instead, I tapped open a new note under the one I'd been building all evening. I titled it, "Their Language, My Record." I wasn't gathering fuel for a fire, I was mapping the architecture of the whole building before I knocked it down. Quietly, thoroughly, with precision. Laureline made her way toward me, her wine glass in hand, that expression she always wore when she wanted something, sweetened, softened, but cold at the core. "You've been quiet," she said, voice light. "Everything okay?" I looked at her for the first time in over an hour. Really looked. Long pause, let it hang. "I'm finally seeing everything clearly," I said. Her smile faltered for half a second before snapping back into place. The fire crackled behind the living room hearth as the final pieces of dessert were cleared. Coffee cups clinked gently against saucers. The lights were low now, intentional, probably. Sylviane liked ambiance. The mood was subdued, like everyone had slipped into the soft after-dinner trance where gossip comes easy and memories are distorted enough to seem tender. I sat still, hands clasped on my lap, no longer pretending to sip from my glass. From across the room, I watched them laugh, Laureline tossing her head just slightly, that practiced tilt of her chin, her fiancé leaning in as if each word from her mouth required decoding. Sylviane presiding over the room like a queen who knew she'd already won the war. None of them knew. Or maybe they did. Maybe they knew everything, and this was all part of the choreography. People think abuse has to be loud, but exclusion is the quietest violence. A woman I hadn't seen all evening approached Laureline with an eager smile. "Darling," she said, "that floral piece in the entry, just stunning. You always have such a delicate touch with presentation." Laureline smiled, demure, as if the compliment embarrassed her. "Oh, I had a little inspiration this year." That was enough. I set my cup down carefully on the marble-topped table. Actually, I said, my voice level but not cold. I made that. The room didn't fall silent, not completely, but it hiccuped. The kind of pause that follows a car stalling at a green light. Laurelyn blinked. Her mouth parted, but nothing came out. A few eyes darted to me, then back to their drinks. No one challenged me. No one defended her. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I just let the air shift. Minutes later, I walked toward the drink station. The wine I'd brought, special vintage, hand-wrapped, was sitting there, label changed. Someone had slipped a new tag over mine. Gold script, faux elegance. A guest, Malis, I think, was swirling a glass as she turned to Laureline. "This vintage is incredible," she said. "Where on earth did you find it?" "She didn't," I said, before Laureline could open her mouth. "That was from me. It just lost its tag somewhere." Mic-drop moments don't always come with gasps. Sometimes they come with a faint tightening of the jaw, a subtle shift in who stops talking first. Laureline didn't argue. She didn't nod. She just stood there, caught between the performance and the fallout. I turned and walked back to the seating area, the rhythm of the room now uneven. Conversations stuttered. A few people exchanged low comments. Sylvienne's face had flattened, her grip on the stem of her glass tighter than before. "You don't need to raise your voice when you finally raise the truth." Elsinore cleared his throat, ever the diplomat. "Well then," he said, standing. "A final toast, perhaps, to family, to forgiveness, and to the future." I stood too. My chair scraped slightly against the floor. All eyes shifted toward me. "I've made peace with a lot tonight," I said, glass in hand but unmoved. "But not with pretending this is normal." I set the glass down, untouched. There were no protests. No one asked where I was going. I walked to the coat rack, slid my arms into my wool trench, and buttoned it slowly. As I reached the front door, I paused, hand on the knob. The hallway was still behind me. The music, the candlelight, the carefully curated warmth. They would go on, as they always had. But I turned, just once, and looked back. "Your photo albums won't miss me," I said. "But one day, you might." I sat in my car, still parked a block away from the estate. The engine was off, but the heat lingered from the short drive. My hands were resting on the steering wheel, unmoving. There was no music, no podcast, not even the faintest buzz from my phone. Just silence, and the hum of blood in my ears. I didn't slam the door. I didn't scream. I just left. And somehow, that was louder. It felt strange not to cry, not even a lump in my throat. What I felt was something quieter, colder, the kind of clarity that comes when you've run out of places to be kind. I let the silence settle in, then turned the key. The car purred to life as I eased away from the curb and back toward the city. The roads were nearly empty. Most people were at home by now, sitting by trees lit with white lights, sipping cider or wine, retelling the same warm stories. I envied them. Somewhere past Stamford, my mind wandered, back to an earlier part of the night, the trivia game. They had done it in French. At one of those spontaneous moments that wasn't truly spontaneous at all, I hadn't been invited to join, even though I was right there, seated at the same table. I remembered one line distinctly. "She looks like she shops at Target." It wasn't even said with malice. It was delivered like a throwaway punchline, the kind meant to make everyone nod knowingly. And they did. It wasn't about language. It was about who was in and who was out. They didn't say it to cut deep. They said it because they thought I was too shallow to notice. Back in Brooklyn, the quiet of my apartment welcomed me like an old friend. The hallway light clicked on with a soft buzz. I dropped my coat on the hook, stepped out of my shoes, and made a beeline to the kitchen. No wine, just water. Water keeps you alive. Wine helps you pretend. I poured a glass and leaned against the counter, letting the stillness spread through my bones. There was a time, maybe a year ago, when I would have dissected every moment of the night, trying to understand what I did wrong, how I could have softened the blow, bridged the distance. But tonight, I didn't care to be the bridge. I was tired of crossing over just to be overlooked. I reached into my bag to grab my phone and felt something crumpled in the inner pocket, a slip of cardstock. It was the original tag from the wine I had brought. the one Loreline had conveniently replaced with a label that matched the decor. Someone, maybe a staff member, maybe not, had tucked it back into my coat without saying a word. One witness was enough. Sometimes the smallest truths carry the most weight. I opened my journal, tucked the card inside, and closed it gently. The silence stretched. I glanced at my phone. No missed calls, no unread texts, no apology. People don't apologize when they think you had no choice but to endure it. I wasn't angry. I wasn't heartbroken. I was just done. I turned off the living room lamp and padded toward the bedroom. Just as I reached for the light switch, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. One new voicemail. I stared at the screen for a moment. Some voices are better heard in the dark. I pressed play. Back in my apartment, the dim light from the hallway barely touched the edges of the living room. I hadn't turned on the lamp. I didn't need to. The quiet was doing enough. I sat on the edge of the couch, coat still on, shoes still damp from the sidewalk. The night had ended hours ago, but I wasn't ready to shed it yet. I stared at the blinking voicemail icon on my phone, knowing exactly who it was from. I played the message once. Her voice was flat, clipped, controlled like always. "Hey, I hope you're okay. Let's talk soon?" That was it. No apology, no acknowledgement of what had unfolded, just the bare minimum, like checking a box on a form labeled damage control. I played it again, this time with the speaker on, and then hit record on the voice memo app. People who hurt you rarely call to say sorry. They call to confirm you're still manageable. I let the message play out in the dark, and when it ended, I didn't respond. I saved the file and titled it, Her Real Voice. The next morning, a knock at my door interrupted the silence. I opened it to find a courier holding a small white envelope. No flowers, no package, just paper. To Brittany, thank you for attending. Sylviane Elsinore. I stared at it for a second before I laughed. Not loud, not cruel, but that kind of dry, exhausted laugh that comes from finally expecting the worst and watching it arrive on schedule. They couldn't erase me, so they renamed me. I walked over to my bookshelf and pulled out my journal, tucked the card next to the wine tag and floral sketch I'd saved. Revenge is a dish best served. Documented. I flipped to a clean page and started outlining the first draft of an essay. The night they forgot I spoke their language. It wasn't about vengeance anymore. It was about truth. My version, not theirs. The one they wouldn't edit with music and smiling holiday captions. Later that afternoon, my phone lit up with a message from an old college friend. "Hey, not sure if you've seen it, but I think Loreline's post is about you. The whole grateful for boundaries and knowing who's real vibe." I didn't reply. I just screenshotted the post and filed it under a new folder. Their rewrite. Let them paint the picture. I'll keep the negatives. That evening, I sealed an envelope. No return address. Inside it, the original wine tag and a handwritten note. "You don't owe me a thank you, but now you know who to thank." I dropped it in the mailbox at the corner of my street, hands cold, heart steady. I didn't feel vindictive. I didn't feel warm either. I just felt leveled, like the weight of being silent had finally shifted off me. Later that night, as I was reaching to switch off the bedside lamp, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I let it ring once, twice, then I answered. "I wasn't sure you'd pick up," a voice said. I didn't need to ask who it was. "I wasn't sure you'd call," I replied. The phone call hung between us like fog, soft and unresolved. I was sitting at the kitchen counter, watching the gray morning light creep in through the blinds. Outside, the city hadn't quite woken up yet. Neither had I. But the voice on the other end of the line, his voice, brought with it a strange stillness. "I wasn't sure you'd pick up," Elsinore said quietly. I let the pause sit before answering. "I wasn't sure you'd call." Another pause, this one longer. "You were right not to raise your glass," he said. "You didn't have to." His voice wasn't rehearsed like Loreline's. There was no edge to it, just the uncomfortable honesty of someone unpracticed in saying the truth out loud. I didn't ask for more. I didn't fish for guilt or redemption. "Thank you for calling," I said. But I didn't need that toast to stand on my own feet. That was it. There was nothing more to salvage, no need to dig deeper. After we hung up, I poured myself a cup of black coffee and sat by the window with my notebook. I flipped through the pages filled with dates, names, words said and not said. Some ink was sharp, some smudged from nights I didn't want to remember. I turned to the final page and wrote one sentence. He didn't stop me. He didn't call me back, but he didn't look away either. And maybe that was enough. Sometimes the one who says nothing says the most. I didn't need them to see the full picture. I needed to step out of the frame. It wasn't weakness that kept me silent that night. It was wisdom. Every word I didn't speak was a decision to protect the person I was becoming, not the one they still imagined me to be. There's a quote by Maya Angelou. I'd scribbled in my journal years ago. I read it again now, aloud to the empty apartment. I can be changed by what happens to me, but I refuse to be reduced by it. Loreline never called, never texted. Her silence wasn't loud, it was strategic. That much I'd come to expect. I didn't block her. I just didn't open the door again. Closure isn't an email. It's a boundary. You build it, brick by brick, in silence. Later that afternoon, I submitted the final draft of my essay to a small but respected cultural magazine. The title read, "When You Speak the Language They Think You Don't Understand." The triumph wasn't in being heard. It was in speaking anyway. A few days passed. The apartment settled into post-holiday stillness. I avoided the feeds, the stories, the photos I knew would be filled with faces smiling in rooms I'd once stood in. Rooms where I now knew I didn't belong and didn't need to. Then, one morning, a plain envelope arrived in my mailbox. No return address. Inside was a photo. It had been cut, cleanly, carefully. One half remained. It was me. Just me. Standing slightly to the side, away from the fire pit. That night? On the back, someone had written in fine black ink, "You didn't need the frame." The folding chairs in the back of the bookstore were mismatched. Some wobbled slightly on the uneven floor. The lighting was soft but imperfect, and the crowd was small, maybe 20 if I was generous, but none of that mattered. This was mine. I stood in front of the modest group, holding a printed copy of my essay in one hand. The title page was creased from my thumb, the pages curled at the edges from having been read and reread. Above me, a small sign hung from string lights. Author reading, Zéphirine Laurent. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice steady. No one looked at their phones. No one shifted uncomfortably. They listened. I read from the second page, right at the part where I'd written, "Exclusion is a game played by people who fear your presence more than they value their power." That line had gone viral last week. Someone had clipped it from a live reading, posted it with a vague caption, and it took off. I didn't care about the numbers. What mattered was how many people messaged me to say, "I've been there too." What I couldn't say around their table, I put into the world. After the reading, a woman in her 70s approached me. She didn't say much, just touched my arm and whispered, "It's never too late to stop being invisible." That night, when I got home, I found an envelope in the mail. Loreline's handwriting. Inside, an invitation. Brunch. Just us. I didn't open it fully. Didn't need to. I slipped it into a blank envelope and sent it back. No return address. Sometimes the strongest thing you can say is nothing. The following afternoon, I received another message. This one was from Sylviane. "We underestimated you. I can see that now. I hope you'll find it in your heart to forgive us someday." I played it once. No emotion. Just words. I didn't save it. I didn't delete it either. Forgiveness doesn't mean returning. It means walking forward without dragging the past behind you. Later, I took out the photo that had come in the anonymous envelope weeks ago, the one from the Christmas party, carefully sliced in half, leaving only my side intact. I framed it. Underneath the glass, I added a small caption I'd written in gold ink. "Proof of presence." It sat on my bookshelf, not to remind me of the pain, but of the power in not disappearing. That weekend, I hosted dinner at my apartment. Simple meal, music playing from a cheap Bluetooth speaker. Friends who laughed too loud and didn't care if their elbows took up too much space. There was one extra seat left open, not for someone specific, but as a reminder. Space, truth, legacy. After we cleared the dishes and the candles had burned down to soft nubs, someone asked me if I missed them. The family, they clarified, though they didn't have to. I smiled, poured myself another glass of wine, and said, "They kicked me out of their dinner." So I made my own, and left the door open for people who bring peace, not judgment.